Imagine someone walking into court not with remorse, but with a smile that says, "This doesn't apply to me." Providence District Court breathed its usual weekday sounds, heels on tile, the papery sigh of files, yet something tighter threaded the air. A school zone speeding case had drawn cameras to the back row, phone screens winked like minnows. The clerk called the name, and a man in a smoke-gray suit stepped to the rail as if onto a private jet. Andrew Marston, 52. Developer. The kind of wealth that makes valet tickets disappear. His tie lay perfectly, his watch would have paid a teacher's salary twice over. He didn't look at the officer, or the children's crosswalk photo clipped to the citation. He looked at the bench. "Judge, you're wasting my time," he said, voice polished to a boardroom sheen. "It would be easier for me to pay you 3 times the fine and leave." A low "oh" rolled across the benches. Camera shutters clicked. Judge Caprio raised one eyebrow, no scold, just a small flag in a stiff breeze, and said nothing for a beat long enough to remind everyone whose room this was. "You won't buy time today, Mr. Marston," he answered, mild as morning coffee. "In here, time belongs to the court." Andrew's smile widened, theatrical. "I'm too wealthy to worry about a few signs and traffic lights." The gallery stirred, whisper, scoff, a quiet, "You hear that?" from somewhere near the door. Caprio lifted his hand, and the sound fell as if the ceiling absorbed it. "Proceedings are paused," he said evenly. "Mr. Marston, sit. We're not here to discuss a fine. We're here to discuss what you think rules are for." The defendant laughed once, short and expensive. Lenses leaned in. A reporter scratched a note. The officer who'd written the ticket kept his eyes on a fixed spot above the clock, jaw set. Caprio opened the file without hurry. School zone. Friday. 8:05 am, he read aloud, letting each fact find its place. He looked up, taking in the room, the parents in scrubs, the retirees with folded arms, the handful of teenagers sitting straighter than usual. "Mr. Marston," he said, "some cases are simple. This one isn't. Not because of speed, but because of attitude." Andrew adjusted a cufflink. "Judge, with respect, I donate to that school. My company paved half their lot." "In my courtroom," Caprio replied, "asphalt does not equal immunity." The benches creaked under shifting weight. Phones dropped a few inches. The judge's tone stayed steady, but the temperature changed, you could feel it. Money had walked in expecting to settle a bill. Instead, it found a door that didn't open to any card. "Here is how we'll proceed," Caprio said, closing the folder with a soft click that sounded louder than a gavel. "You will put aside what you can afford. You will answer for what you risked." He nodded to the clerk. The red light on the recorder glowed. Outside, a siren bed passed and kept going. Inside, even the cameras seemed to hold their breath as the day's most expensive man discovered that, for the next few minutes, he could purchase exactly nothing. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel." Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, hands folded, tone measured. "Mr. Marston," he began, "tell me who you are. Not what you own, who you are." A pause. The businessman smirked, as if asked a riddle beneath his dignity. "I'm the owner of half this city, if that's what you're asking." A few laughs murmured from the back benches, quickly silenced by Caprio's glance. "Ownership," the judge said calmly, "isn't identity. It's a balance sheet. I'm asking about the man who wakes up before that balance sheet opens." Andrew tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. "That man gets things done. Always has." The judge nodded slowly, then gestured toward the folder. "And sometimes, in getting things done, he forgets where people walk, or when children cross." The air thickened. The court officer stepped closer with a document, the citation report. 58 miles per hour, the officer read. School zone. Friday, 8:05 am. Caprio looked up. "That's the time when crossing guards are out," Mr. Marston. The developer shrugged, a faint flicker of annoyance in his smile. And their parents drive, too. You can't expect me to crawl through town just because kids might be late for class. A soft hiss of disbelief spread through the benches. Someone muttered, unbelievable. Cameras caught faces tightening. Caprio's voice stayed calm, but the temperature in it dropped. I have a grandson. He's 9. He walks through one of those zones every morning. If you'd hit him, what would you have said? The same thing, that you're too rich to worry. Andrew cleared his throat, the arrogance thinning for the first time. It was an empty street. The judge's tone softened, not with pity, but precision. No street is empty, Mr. Marston. There's always someone's child, someone's time, someone's safety on it. You just don't see them from the driver's seat of your car, or the tower you built. Silence. Even the camera lenses seemed to hesitate. Caprio leaned back, eyes narrowing as though studying something invisible behind the man's polished surface. Tell me about your childhood. Andrew blinked, caught off guard. My childhood? Yes, the judge said. When did you first learn that rules could be optional? The smirk returned, but weaker. My father was a banker. He taught me that rules are flexible, if you can afford good advice. So you were never told no, Caprio said quietly. Andrew chuckled. No one told my father no either. And when was the last time you lost something that couldn't be bought back? The man's grin faltered. He hesitated, then forced a dismissive shrug. In business, you don't lose. You negotiate. The judge tilted his head, voice now low enough that the words seemed to land directly between them. And in life? No answer. The courtroom held its breath. Even those who'd come for spectacle now sat still, watching a man realize that power meant nothing in a place built for truth. Caprio finally spoke again, voice gentle but cutting. Money protects you from inconvenience, not from consequence. You've lived so long surrounded by yes that you've forgotten what it sounds like to earn respect. Andrew's eyes flickered with something, anger, maybe fear, but he stayed silent. Caprio closed the report slowly. I'm not here to embarrass you, Mr. Marston. I'm here to remind you that decency is not a luxury brand. He turned toward the gallery, his words for everyone now. There's a sickness that comes from too much comfort. It convinces you that danger belongs to others. But the law doesn't check bank accounts before tragedy. The room was silent again, no whispers, no cameras clicking. Just the sound of someone realizing that the world he built couldn't protect him here. Caprio's final words cut through the stillness. If you think wealth frees you from worry, you've already lost what matters most. Conscience doesn't take payment. Andrew looked down, jaw tight, the first shadow of humility crossing his face. The judge tapped his pen once against the desk. Let's continue, he said softly. Because I suspect your story didn't start with this speeding ticket, and it won't end with it either. It was supposed to be routine, a fine, a few remarks about safety, and a signature. But as the morning light slanted across the courtroom floor, Judge Caprio felt something off. The air had changed. When the clerk handed him the citation folder, he noticed the first inconsistency: the officer's signature didn't match the usual form. Not the same slant, not the same pressure on the ink. The judge's brow furrowed. Officer Daniels, he said, did you fill out this document yourself? The officer, a man of calm bearing, studied the page and frowned. No, Your Honor. That's my name, but not my handwriting. A quiet hum spread through the benches. Even the journalists looked up from their screens. Caprio shifted his gaze toward Andrew Marston. Mr. Marston, this signature, who wrote it? The businessman smiled faintly, as though the question were beneath him. I corrected it. My assistant must have missed a detail, so I had someone fix it. I like things accurate. Caprio set the paper down. Accurate, he repeated softly. You call it accuracy. Others might call it forgery. A flicker crossed Andrew's expression, momentary irritation, quickly hidden. I manage hundreds of papers daily, Judge. Mistakes happen. Yes, Caprio said, but some mistakes wear suits and call themselves efficiency. The laughter that threatened to rise in the room died at his tone. The judge turned to the clerk. Pull the original ticket from the traffic department system. Minutes later, a new document appeared on the projector. The name wasn't Andrew Marston. It belonged to someone else, Daniel Cobb, Marston's driver. A stir swept through the room. The businessman adjusted his cufflink, trying to look unbothered. Caprio's voice grew quieter, steadier, every word deliberate. So, the ticket was written to your driver. Yet here you stand in his place. Why? Andrew sighed, the performance cracking slightly. Because it was my car, my company's insurance. He's a good employee, I didn't want this affecting him. Caprio leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You didn't want it affecting him, or you didn't want it traced to you? The question hung there, sharp as glass. Andrew didn't answer. The judge nodded slowly, almost to himself. You paid a man to take your fault. Then you corrected a document to make it tidy. You're not the first to try to outsource guilt, Mr. Marston, but you're the first to call it generosity. A low rumble of approval rolled through the benches. Someone muttered, about time. Caprio raised his hand. Quiet, please. He turned back to the defendant. You said earlier you're too rich to worry. But I wonder, are you too rich to remember what accountability feels like? Andrew's eyes hardened. You're not here to judge my principles. Oh, Caprio said softly, but they're the reason you're standing in front of me. The courtroom froze. The man who had arrived untouchable now looked cornered, not by the law, but by the weight of truth. Caprio closed the file and rested his palms on the bench. This court will recess briefly, he said. When we return, we won't be talking about traffic. We'll be talking about conscience. He struck the gavel once. The echo filled the room like thunder held too long. As people stood, whispering, Andrew remained still. For the first time, his smile had vanished, not out of defeat, but because he'd realized the game he'd been playing his whole life no longer worked here. The courtroom froze. Judge Caprio lifted his eyes from the papers, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, no longer soft, but precise as glass. Mr. Marston, he said quietly, before we proceed, I'd like to call a new witness. Heads turned. Even the journalists leaned forward. No one had expected that. Please bring in Mr. Lucas Dyer, Caprio continued. Mr. Marston's assistant driver. The doors opened, and a young man entered, nervous, thin, dressed too neatly for comfort. He glanced at Andrew, who refused to meet his eyes. Lucas took the stand, his hands trembling slightly as he was sworn in. Caprio's tone remained gentle but firm. Mr. Dyer, you understand you're under oath? Yes, sir, Lucas said. I need to ask you directly, Caprio began. Did Mr. Marston instruct you to claim responsibility for the speeding citation? For a moment, the young man stared at his shoes. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, yes, sir. He did. He said he'd make it worth it. He promised a raise. I couldn't refuse, I've got a little girl, she's sick. A ripple of shock coursed through the room. Someone gasped. Others muttered. The sound of camera shutters filled the silence. Andrew's face turned crimson. This is absurd, he snapped. That kid's chasing pity. I pay him more than he's worth. Caprio's head tilted slightly. And you believe that makes you morally right? Andrew shot back without hesitation. It makes me efficient. The judge didn't answer. He simply reached forward, clicked off his microphone, and sat in silence. The room held its breath. For 10 seconds, 20, then 30. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. Finally, Caprio spoke, not loudly, but with a weight that made every word land like a hammer. "Mr. Marston, do you know why I've paused this court? Because at this moment, we've stepped out of law and into something far more fragile, our shared humanity." Andrew's posture stiffened. The arrogance in his expression faltered, replaced by something unsure. Caprio leaned forward, his tone quiet, reflective. "Let me tell you a story. Years ago, a man once told me that money buys respect. He died alone, with a room full of photographs of people who'd long stopped visiting. You remind me of him." A murmur spread across the gallery, softer this time, no outrage now, only stillness. The air felt heavy, sacred almost, as if the entire courtroom had become a mirror. Caprio's gaze never left Andrew. "You've mistaken fear for respect, obedience for admiration. But fear disappears when the paycheck ends. Respect stays only when it's earned." Andrew opened his mouth as if to respond, but no sound came. His throat tightened. For the first time, his hands weren't steady, they shook slightly, the cufflink glinting as his fingers trembled. Lucas looked down, eyes wet, ashamed to even witness the fall of the man who'd once seemed untouchable. Caprio's tone softened, the firmness replaced by something quieter, almost sorrowful. "You've spent your life building towers, Mr. Marston. But the higher you built them, the smaller the people below began to look. That's why you forgot they were real." The silence that followed was alive, dense enough to feel. No one moved. No one coughed. Even the officer by the door shifted his weight gently, careful not to break it. For the first time, Andrew's voice trembled. "Are you finished humiliating me?" he asked. Caprio looked at him, eyes steady, voice calm. "Humiliation? No, Mr. Marston. That's pride collapsing under the weight of truth. What you feel right now, is honesty catching up." Andrew looked away, jaw tight, his breath shallow. The mask hadn't fallen completely, but a crack had appeared. And for the first time in his life, the sound of silence in a courtroom frightened him more than any verdict ever could. Judge Caprio reopened the file with deliberate calm. But the air in the room had changed. This was no longer about traffic violations or fines. It was about the anatomy of deceit, peeled back layer by layer. "Mr. Marston," he began, "I've reviewed a note from the clerk. It states the original fine for your citation was already paid, before this hearing. Is that correct?" Andrew straightened his shoulders, recovering a fragment of his old composure. "I settle matters quickly, Judge. It's efficient." Caprio tapped his pen once against the table. "Efficient, yes. But the payment didn't come from your personal account. It came from the corporate fund, registered under Marston Developments. Meaning, your company paid the price for your mistake." A flicker of discomfort crossed Andrew's face. "It's all the same money," he said quietly. "Then maybe that's the problem," Caprio replied. "When everything you touch becomes the same currency, you start forgetting which debts belong to your conscience." The murmurs returned, heavier this time, rolling through the benches like distant thunder. Before the next word could fall, the courtroom door opened. A woman stepped in, gray hair pinned neatly, clutching a folder of hospital papers. She looked exhausted but resolute. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Lucas Dyer's mother." Caprio nodded for her to approach. The young man at the witness stand froze, eyes wide. She held up the papers. "These are my granddaughter's medical bills," she said. "My son works for Mr. Marston 16 hours a day. He's missed nights at the hospital. He told me he took the blame because he needed the money for her treatment. He didn't lie to you, sir. He lied to himself, to believe good comes from obedience." The room fell utterly silent. Andrew's gaze dropped. His jaw tensed, but his voice, when it came, was stripped of force. "Mrs. Dyer. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." The woman looked at him, not angry, just tired. "Meaning doesn't feed a sick child, Mr. Marston. But truth might. Caprio's voice, steady but carrying the weight of every decade he'd lived, filled the silence. Now I understand why this hearing matters. It's no longer about speeding or signatures. It's about the difference between power and decency. He paused, then looked directly at Andrew. You once said you're too rich to worry. Today I wonder, are you rich enough to feel remorse? Andrew didn't speak. His hands lay folded, the tremor returning. Caprio nodded to the bailiff, signaling for quiet as the crowd began to murmur again. This court recognizes your violation as both legal and moral. You forged a document, bribed silence, and built comfort from another man's desperation. Yet, he paused, letting the word hang, I'll give you one chance. Tell this court what care means to you. The question cut deeper than accusation. Andrew looked up slowly, his face unreadable. The gallery waited. Someone whispered, he's going to break. Seconds stretched. Then Andrew spoke, barely audible. Care, he said, is, when you do something that costs you. Caprio nodded, a faint sadness behind his eyes. A fair definition, he said. Let's hope you start paying the right kind of price. He closed the folder, the soft thud echoing in the stillness. From the benches, someone sighed, a long, quiet exhale, the kind people make when watching a man finally realize the world doesn't bend for him anymore. And for the first time that morning, Andrew Marston didn't look like a millionaire. He looked like a man seeing the edges of his reflection begin to blur. For the first time since the hearing began, Andrew Marston said nothing. And his silence filled the courtroom like a sound no one wanted to interrupt. He sat with his shoulders bent slightly forward, eyes lowered. The cameras, once drawn to his confidence, now caught something rare, stillness. No performance, no defense, just a man stripped down to truth. Judge Caprio leaned back, studying him with a quiet patience. You've spoken much about success, Mr. Marston, he said finally. But I'd like to hear something different. Why do you think you've spent your life building walls instead of bridges? Andrew's throat moved, but the words came slow, fragile. Because bridges can collapse, Judge. Walls can't. Caprio nodded once. And what do walls keep out? The pause stretched. People, Andrew whispered. Then, after a moment, pain. Caprio's tone softened. Pain is what reminds us we're human. Without it, we stop recognizing the harm we cause. The businessman's voice dropped lower. I just wanted people to fear me, he said. Because when they fear you, they don't leave. I was tired of being left. A collective stillness fell over the room. Even the bailiff looked away. Caprio folded his hands, the faintest tremor of empathy in his voice. They didn't leave, Mr. Marston. You pushed them away. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The courtroom, once a place of judgment, had turned into something almost sacred. Then the judge reached for his papers, the final page waiting like a verdict and a lesson combined. This court imposes a fine of $50,000, he said. Not to the state, but to a fund for the children of your employees. The ones who pay for your mistakes in silence. You'll donate directly, and you'll do it personally, not through an accountant. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, rising into soft applause. Some nodded, others wiped their eyes. Andrew looked up slowly, voice unsteady. I'll do it. Every cent. Caprio regarded him with a faint, knowing smile. Good. Then maybe you'll learn that real wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give back when no one's watching. He paused, letting the words breathe, then continued more quietly. This court doesn't seek to punish you, Mr. Marston. It seeks to introduce you to yourself. The judge turned toward Lucas, who sat pale and motionless. Mr. Dyer, you may rise. Andrew followed him with his eyes. His voice was almost a whisper. Lucas, he said, I'm sorry. For using you. For making you believe your child's illness was your burden alone. It should have been mine. Lucas blinked rapidly, his mouth trembling. "Thank you, sir." Caprio nodded once. "That's enough," he said softly. "Sometimes, justice isn't about the balance of punishment, it's about restoring the balance of dignity." He lifted the gavel and looked around the room. Court adjourned. The sound of the strike echoed, not sharp, but resonant, like a closing door that finally lets light through. As people began to leave, Andrew lingered by the table. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't check the time. Outside, he could hear traffic, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing without him. For years, he had thought silence was weakness. Now, it felt like peace. He walked past the cameras without speaking. No smile, no statement. Just a man stepping into daylight, for once unarmed. And as the judge gathered his files, his words seemed to linger in the air long after the courtroom emptied. Sometimes the verdict isn't a number, it's the first heartbeat of a new conscience.